yeah, actually I would say that the show is better than the comics it was based on, as long as it's opposite day. Howdy, I'm Kurt Williams, and today we're talking about Ekko. I finally had the chance to watch the 5-episode Disney Plus series, and by had the chance, I mean I got around to it, and I was, kind of disappointed in the show. I'm not the kind of person who will binge watch a whole TV show in one day. I want to watch each episode and then have a day or two to process the episode and think about it. And for this show, I kept finding myself watching an episode one day and then the next day finding someone I could talk to about how much wasted potential they had in this show. Because this series, where they introduce Ekko, was one of the first comics to blow my mind. It's so well written. Not to mention it's got this gorgeous art by Quesada, who's one of my favorite artists. Now, if you've seen the show Hawkeye, that's the show that more specifically follows this storyline. And they've substituted in Hawkeye instead of Daredevil, but the point remains the same. The Kingpin takes care of Maya Lopez, and he convinces her that Hawkeye or Daredevil killed her father, so he sends her to go and kill Hawkeye or Daredevil. And then at the end of the series, Ekko has realized that it was actually Kingpin who killed her father, so she goes and shoots him in the face, temporarily blinding him. But that's about where the similarities end between the comic and the show. And there were a lot of things going on in the Hawkeye TV show, so we didn't get as much time to focus on Ekko as I would have liked, so when it was announced they were doing a secondary show focusing on just her, I was pretty excited, because she's a pretty cool character. But none of the things that I love about her character actually showed up in her personal show. In the comic, just like the TV show, she is deaf, but she is also a genius. She's a gifted musician, she's a gifted dancer, she can speak as if she wasn't deaf because she's so good at watching people talk that she's just figured out how to do it. She's also a very skilled fighter, but not just because she practices often, but because she has photographic reflexes. And photographic reflexes are basically you see somebody do something and then you can do it too. And there's a character in the MCU who can sort of do this already, the character Taskmaster from the Black Widow movie, but that's less to do with what the character herself is capable of and more what her enhancements and the cybernetic whatever she's wearing can enable her to do. So some people will say, oh, we already have somebody with photographic reflexes in the MCU. We don't need Maya Lopez to also have it because that would be copying them, which is kind of stupid. So in the comic, Ekko is a fighter for fun mostly, but then when Kingpin tells her that Daredevil killed her father, she learns how Daredevil fights. She watches a ton of videos of him fighting, a ton of videos of Elektra fighting, a ton of videos of Bullseye fighting, and she knows all the moves that work on him. And that, to me, is a way more credible reason for her to be a real threat to Daredevil than whatever they've said in the TV shows where she's a boxer, so she happens to be really, really good at fighting. Because Maya Lopez in the show can not only fight Daredevil, but she can fight like 5 or 6 dudes all at once. Why? Because she did martial arts as a kid. I don't think that anybody who did martial arts and even boxing as a kid could take on Daredevil. I mean, he's supposed to be really, really good at fighting. So what I'm saying is in the comic we had a much more believable reason for why she could successfully fight Daredevil. And looking past all that, we did get that really cool flashback fight scene between Ekko and Daredevil in that first episode of the series. But even that wasn't as cool as the scene in the comic where she beats him up with a teeter-totter. That's pretty sick. Another thing that made this story so cool was that Maya Lopez was a perfect complement for Matt Murdock. A brief coffee meeting they have to discuss a case turns from coffee into lunch, into a walk in the park, into dinner, into going to see a movie together. Yeah, that's right, blind guy Matt Murdock goes to see a movie. So you have Ekko, a deaf person, explaining to Matt what's happening on the screen, and you have Matt, a blind person, explaining what people are saying when they're off screen to Maya. It's just freaking adorable. It's so well written and so romantic, and it is Matt Murdock at his absolute happiest because he's finally found someone who's so perceptive of everything going on around them because Maya's deaf and she has to perceive things differently, so she's paying more attention to stuff. She's also got a very quick wit, she's charming, she's decisive, she's confident, she's a very well-written character, and she is a perfect complement to Daredevil, which is why it's so upsetting that when Maya finally goes to kill Daredevil because she believes that he killed her father, Daredevil can't even explain himself to her because they're so busy fighting that she can't read his lips. Now in the comic, Maya doesn't go around killing people all willy-nilly. She's not power hungry, she just wants to be artistic, and now she's found the person who's killed her father, so she wants to get revenge. And that's it. As soon as she realizes that it wasn't Daredevil, it was Kingpin who killed her father, she goes and takes out her revenge on Kingpin, and then she just disappears. Whereas in the show, we get Maya Lopez as an entirely different character. She doesn't care about other people since her dad was killed, and she won't let anybody else care about her. When she finds out that the Kingpin killed her father, all she wants to do is get her revenge and then take his place at the top of the criminal empire. She's angsty and standoffish and destructive constantly, and she's just all in all kind of a boring character. She's she's not a protagonist that I'm interested in supporting because I don't believe she's trying to do the right thing. So what we have in the show is Maya retreating back to Oklahoma from New York so that she can figure out some way to take over the Kingpin's empire, which seemed a little bit like a convenient plot device for us to meet her family, because she could have overthrown the empire from anywhere that's connected by rail to New York. All she did was put a bomb on a train, and that was her entire plan for taking down his empire. But I will say one of the ways that the show treated the character better than the comic was that they actually took her roots seriously. In the comics, the only reference we get to her indigenous heritage is when we talk about her father, whose nickname is Crazy Horse. Not because Crazy Horse has anything to do with his roots as a Native American, just because people think he's kind of crazy. And he's Native American, so Crazy Horse is what they come up with. So that's pretty racist. In the show, when Maya goes back to Oklahoma, where her family is, we get to see a lot more of her Native American heritage. And in the very first episode, they set up this cool creation story, and then we get all these ancestors that predate Maya, and they all have special traits, or they're all tapping into their spiritual ancestry, and they get these supernatural powers that a few select people can access. Such as Maya's mother, who has powers of healing, or a previous ancestor who is a sharpshooter and really good with weapons, or a previous ancestor who protected everybody from a falling cave when they came to the earth from where they were born or something. Or like that previous ancestor who I guess was a leader by the way that she was walking in front of everyone. I don't know, that one was vague. And by the end of the show, Maya has learned to harness these powers that have been passed down to her through the generations, which is a really cool idea, but it was written really poorly. Most of the problem was pacing. We didn't have enough time to really sit with these moments, so by the time we got to the conflict at the very end of the show, it didn't feel like the show had even started. And part of the reason for that was the show was supposed to be 6 episodes, but then the budget got cut, so they had to cram the last 3 episodes into 2 episodes, and everything just got squished together. Which, yeah, that sucks for the writers, and you can make concessions for them all day long, but their job is to write a script, and if they have to change their script based on new circumstances, that's kind of their job. Anyway, the other main reason that this whole inheriting powers from your ancestors thing didn't work in this show was because Maya did not care at all about her heritage for the majority of the show. For 4 episodes, she wanted nothing to do with it. She never mentions it. She never wants to talk to anybody about it. She doesn't want to be around it. And then all of a sudden at the very end, she's wearing this tribal outfit and she's summoning the power of all of her ancestors, and it's this big hero moment. But we really didn't have the chance to see her mulling over this transformation that took place. Maybe one of the points of the show was that she was disconnected from her roots and she was convinced that she should be reconnected to her roots. But like I said before, this version of Maya is so angsty and standoffish and just dramatic. She wanted nothing to do with it the whole time. And then all of a sudden, it's her whole life. So we've effectively substituted her photographic reflexes from the comics with these mix of spiritual abilities like healing and fighting and being strong, I guess. And I could talk for hours about how the rest of the show was so uninteresting and all the characters were so boring. Like Bonnie, who was supposed to be her best friend, had absolutely no character development outside of she's a firefighter. Or Biscuits, who's just transparent comedy relief and has absolutely nothing to do with his life except get pushed around by Maya constantly. Or Zane, who is the absolute worst secondary villain I've ever seen in a Marvel TV show. Does Marvel still think that we want to just see the mob fighting superheroes? Do they really think that we care so much about the mob? And it was really cool that Marvel got to partner with the Choctaw Nation when they were filming this show, but the big powwow they had in the final episode, as cool as it looked, really didn't need to be there. It didn't have any importance for the overall story. Why was Maya involved in the powwow for like 45 seconds? She had no reason to be there. In fact, she was trying to be sneaky, but instead she's in the middle of a crowd of screaming people. This really brief, non-committal parallel they tried to make between Biscuits fixing his grandma's car and Ekko reconnecting to her roots was so lackluster and laughable. I had to pause the show to laugh at it. Maya is planning to overthrow Kingpin's criminal empire, but she's got plenty of time to take a walk in the woods. Why are we spending so much time watching Maya ride a motorcycle? Is this an ad for motorcycles or a TV show? I guess the point I'm trying to make is that the show was not very good, and even if it hadn't been written terribly, the character they started out with was so far from the awesome character we got in the comics that the show was just kind of irredeemable. Ekko is supposed to be a genius and a gifted artist and have these sick photographic reflexes that make her a great fighter and piano player. She's supposed to be articulate and nuanced and compassionate and funny, not just this brick wall of teen angst who fights people. So in conclusion, Yeah, the comic is way better than the show, and even though they handled her heritage terribly in the comic, the way that they handled the heritage in the show was so unimportant to her character as it was written in the show that it could have just as well not been there. I would love to see a better show where they explain Ekko's connection to her ancestors, because that's a really cool idea. It was just not executed very well. I'm all for adding to a character's personality, to their origin, to all of that stuff. You can add things to them, but what made the MCU so cool to begin with was that they really got to the essence of these characters. Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man was not the Iron Man from the comics on the surface, but when you got down to who he was as a person, it's the same Tony Stark. And the way that Peter Parker spoke and the things he did in the movies weren't directly related to the comics, but who Peter Parker was in the MCU is so on point with who he was in the comics. The Ekko we got in the show is not the Ekko we got in the comics. So there you have it, empirical evidence that the comic was better than the TV show. If you haven't read the comic, I really recommend it. This is great writing. It's pretty much poetry in motion. It's beautiful to read. And if you have read the comic but you still think the show is better, by all means, drop a comment, let's have a discussion. And also, like and subscribe and tell your mother you love her, all that good stuff. Bye.